Hello everyone, this is Ghadir Khan. Today we are going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, or as I'd like to call it, the 4F system. The fight or flight, food or, excuse my language, fuck system. Okay, so first thing first, we all know that it is divided into two important divisions, sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. The sympathetic is very popularly known as the adrenaline rush. Very popular term. Everyone knows about it. Have you ever heard of like an adrenaline junkie? People who what do adrenaline junkies do? They are known to chase an adrenaline high. All of these terms are very popular in mainstream media. But usually what do these people do? Skydiving, bungee jumping, extreme sports, all of these things. Why? Like if we narrow it down to normal everyday people, we would look at hide and seek, for example. Have you ever played hide and seek? Remember how you felt when you were hiding and the seeker came close? How your heart rate was very fast and you were so excited and super alert, and you also almost peed your pants. Yeah, all of these things. So increased heart rate, pupil constriction, and even relaxed bladder, so you feel like you're going to pee at any minute. All of this is an adrenaline rush effect. Adrenaline is the same thing as epinephrine and norepinephrine. Actually, it's the same thing. It's just that scientists have decided that too many people use this term by now that they just kind of said, no, we can't have that. We can't have our language used by mainstream everyday people like that. That is just so offensive. So they changed the names from adrenaline, noradrenaline to epinephrine and norepinephrine. Still the same thing, the same hormone that is produced by the adrenal medulla, and the same thing that goes and gets stored in the adrenergic fiber, right? So adrenaline, main mediator of the sympathetic nervous system, is the same thing as epinephrine and norepinephrine. It gets secreted or made in the adrenal medulla, and it gets stored in the adrenergic fibers. What does it act on? Adrenaline or epinephrine or epinephrine is a neurotransmitter. What does it act on? Well, we'll find that in a minute, but as a spoiler alert, just keep in mind that it acts on the post-ganglionic fibers of the sympathetic nervous system. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to it in a minute. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is if this is an adrenaline rush, this is what I like to call the acetylcholine slump. Have you ever heard of a food coma? I'm pretty sure you've experienced food coma, if nowhere else then it's on Eid. Yesterday was Thanksgiving. Everyone knows what turkey coma is. Yeah, if you've ever met anyone who celebrates Thanksgiving, they will tell you about turkey coma, where they just go in a coma, where they nap after they eat the big dinner. Why? Like I said, it's the other two F's. So this is where you are relaxed. Your food, you're not eating physically, but what happens after you eat inside, like digestion and all of that. Acetylcholine, where does it come from? It comes from cholinergic. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about before we go on is the effect. Like I said, it relaxes you. If this puts you in high alert, this relaxes you to do these kind of activities, recreational activities, where your heart rate is slower, your pupils are dilated, everything in you is at a much much slower rate. You are resting. Some other people call it rest and digest. So you are resting and digesting, and you might even fall asleep. So everything is fine. Even you can go to the bathroom if you want, do all kinds of number 1 and 2 and all kinds of activities. You might even get a little bit sexy. So it's kind of okay. Everything here is very nice and slow and very quiet. So it is released from the cholinergic fiber. Where does it go? We will see in a minute. But as a spoiler alert, everywhere except here. What's it controlled by? We will see. Let's find out. But also, spoiler alert, hypothalamus. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system, like we said, it's a reflex control system that is not under conscious. What does autonomic mean? Autonomy in general means independence. So autonomic means independent. It's completely independent, totally involuntary, 100% not in your control. It is controlled by a higher power. What is the higher power here? It's the hypothalamus. It controls everything. You don't control nothing. Okay? The hypothalamus controls both divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Everything is controlled by the hypothalamus. Okay, so it's responsible for homeostasis. Obviously, every system in the body plays into the homeostasis maintenance. So that's not very surprising. Like we just said, it has two major, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The afferent sensory fibers come from a bunch of things like baroreceptor, chemoreceptor. Baroreceptors. Have you ever heard of a barometer? I think it's an apparatus that... No, I don't think. I know it's an apparatus that measures pressure. What kind of pressure, though, I don't really understand. I don't really remember because I hated physics. I sucked at physics, so I don't really remember what kind of pressure. I just know it measures pressure. Baroreceptor in the body also measures pressure. What kind of pressure? Blood pressure. Chemoreceptors for the carbon dioxide, oxygen, etc., etc. And these systems, all the body systems, are innervated by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, let's take a closer look. Like I just said, there is an autonomic and a somatic nervous system. No, we did not talk about the somatic nervous system. We are going to talk about it now. The autonomic nervous system innervates all the systems in your body, everything except one thing. One thing that is in your control, that is voluntary and you can move. What is that thing? Your skeletal muscles. Your skeletal muscles are innervated by your somatic nervous system. Okay? So the somatic nervous system innervates your skeletal muscles, like we just said. It has two neurons, upper and lower neurons. Any changes in these neurons will affect the muscle innervated by it. I mean, it makes sense. If something happens here, for example, to this neuron, lower neuron, then this entire muscle will be out. Okay? Makes sense, صح? Similarly, if anything happens here, your upper motor neuron will be out. We said that the autonomic nervous system is controlled by the hypothalamus. Then what is the somatic nervous system controlled by? Good question. It's controlled by the motor cortex, which makes perfect sense since it's a skeletal muscle, something that you move, something that moves, and you move it. So it has to be controlled by the motor cortex. Okay. Another thing that you need to know here is that the somatic motor nucleus of the spinal cord comes from the anterior horn. Remember when we talked about the anterior and posterior horns? We said that the anterior, it was much larger and it innervates everything in the body except the face. Remember? Except the head, sorry, not just the face itself, except the head. Okay, so here where it comes into play. Okay? The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, is a little bit, well, not complicated per se, but it has a lot more to go into it, that goes into it. Because, it controls everything in your body, from your brain to your sphincters. So, and you are a complicated organism. So, there's a lot that goes into it. So, first of all, you need to know that it comes from the nuclei of the hypothalamus and right down into the spinal cord. There are preganglionic fibers that end at ganglia, these ganglia, and then the postganglionic fibers take it away from the ganglia and into the organ. Okay? Nothing too complicated at this point. We said it is controlled by the hypothalamus. All the viscerals, motor and effector, are controlled by the hypothalamus. What kind of effector viscerals? These. Your smooth muscles, like in your blood vessels, for example, glands, your cardiac muscles, and your adipocytes. Because one of the things that the effects of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, is lipolysis using your adipocytes. Okay, here it's the same thing, but we have to talk about it again. The effector organ in the somatic motor is the skeletal muscle. It has no ganglia. The ganglia here are exclusively for the autonomic nervous system. The type of neuromuscular junction is specialized, it's only excitatory, it's fast, very fast, okay, and it's myelinated. If something happened to the neuron, like denervation, results in paralysis or atrophy. Okay, paralysis. The whole muscle will be out. On the other hand, in the autonomic motor, like we said, the effector organs are cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and glands. By the way, when you see gland anywhere, you just know that immediately it's going to be slow. It's synonymous to slow. Why? Because it takes time to make hormones. It takes time to produce hormones. It takes time to release hormones. It takes time for the hormone to go to effector site. It takes time for the effect to take place. Like, it takes a long time to happen. And also, because it takes a long time to happen, it takes a long time to act. It also takes a long time to stop acting. Because it didn't go through all of that for it to just do one small thing. No, it's going to take a long time to finish what it started. It is the ganglia. We said it's exclusive for the autonomic nervous system. It is located paravertebral, next to the vertebra, or prevertebral, collateral, or at the terminal ganglia. Or there are things that are called terminal ganglia. We will see in a minute. Another thing is that it has no specialization of postsynaptic membrane. Okay? All areas of smooth muscle cells contain receptor proteins for neurotransmitters. So there is no specialization, and that is why it's either excitatory or inhibitory. It's not specialized. Like we just said, it is slow, and the preganglionic is myelinated. Preganglionic fibers are myelinated, lightly myelinated, not even that much. The postganglionic, on the other hand, are unmyelinated, okay? If denervation happened, the result is a hypersensitivity, not total paralysis, just hypersensitive. Okay, again, let's talk about the division, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Let's start with the parasympathetic first. The parasympathetic, okay, the ANS, the 4F system, okay? So these are the lateral two Fs, the food and the other one, the frick. Okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system, it originates, the fiber originates from the cervical and sacral. You know why? Okay, this is for the last F, right? And the cervical. Okay, like we said, every division has pre and post ganglia. It has to start somewhere and it has to end somewhere. So the preganglions in the parasympathetic nervous system are long, and they end in the terminal parasympathetic ganglia or near or within the target organ. The post ganglions are short and they spread out to the organ. I know it sounds really complicated, but let's look at it on the diagram. Look here. We said the preganglion are long. Look how long. Look how long they are. The solid line is the preganglion. The dotted line is the postganglion, okay? So let's just look at the solid line. Solid line is very long. Look from the cervical here up down until the large intestines. Very long, literally from your head to your anus. Oh my God. So very long. They terminate at the organ, right? At the organ or in the parasympathetic ganglia, right? These are called parasympathetic ganglia, right? So they terminate here. Okay, so they terminated at the parasympathetic or within the organ. What next? Is that all? No. Someone has to take over. Who takes over now? The dotted line. What does the dotted line stand for? The postganglion. So the postganglion will come and take over. But look at it. They are much shorter. Look here. Look how short they are. Very short. Look at it. So cute. Oh my God, I can't even see. Look how short it is. It's very short. Very short. So much shorter, right? But what do? They are spread out. So they are shorter, but they spread out in the organ. Okay? This is the difference between the pre and post ganglions in the parasympathetic nervous system. On the flip side, the thing is about these two divisions is that the ANS is a coin, and the two divisions, the SNS and the PNS, are the two sides of the same coin. They work together at the same time, always and forever. It's not like one will take over and the other one will shut down. That's not how it works. You will die that way. You can't have your fight or flight response turned on completely. Your heart rate will go so high up you might actually die. You can't have that. On the other hand, you can't be like, your heart rate can't be slow and slow and slow. You will also die. So they have to work together at the same time all the time. Okay, just this is one thing that you have to understand from now to understand everything else that will come afterward. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, starts from the thoracic and the lumbar. Look at here, it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Thoracic, it contains the heart and the lungs, right? The heart and the lungs. And here, the lumbar, it contains also, or close to it, is the kidneys, the adrenal glands, where the adrenaline is made. The key aspect, or the crucial thing about the sympathetic nervous system, is speed. Speed is very crucial in the sympathetic response, in the fight or flight response. Yeah. From an evolutionary point of view, the fight or flight response developed during the time when humans were hunters and gatherers, and they were faced with life-threatening danger every day. So in the face of a lion, say for example, you can't just sit and ponder your response with the lion, like, are you going to attack me? Should I move? Should I run? Should I stay? No, you can't do that. You will be dead. So you have to act fast. And to act fast, things have to be very close by. And because it acts fast, it acts on mass activation. Everything here will be activated at the same time, simultaneously, everywhere. That is why the preganglionic fibers in the sympathetic nervous system, they get divided into, they branch out in 3 different divisions. Either on the same level, 2 ganglions on the same level, ascend or descend to another trunk, or they pass through the trunk to another prevertebral ganglion. What is the trunk that I keep talking about? This trunk is the sympathetic trunk ganglion called paravertebral. This is the paravertebral trunk next to the vertebra. This is the parasympathetic ganglion. Don't confuse it. I know it sounds the same, but it's completely different. These are parasympathetic ganglion. These are paravertebral chain ganglions. Chain. Okay? Vertebral. Another thing, the preganglions in the SNS, they are from the lateral horn, okay? And they leave via T1 from the beginning of the thoracic down until L2. Terminates at L2. It doesn't go to L5. Terminates at L2. Okay, and like we said, it from these T1 through L2 to the sympathetic trunk ganglion, or what is known as the paravertebral chain. From there, okay, so just one thing. From what I said here, it's short. Just so you know, it's short, the preganglion. Okay, so from there, the postganglions will take over. So they will start from the paravertebral chain, or from the prevertebral fiber. Okay? They are longer. Look here. Look how long it is. It starts from here and goes all the way up there and down here and everywhere. So it's much longer. And it takes part in the autonomic plexus. I'll show you in a minute. Here it's not that obvious. Look here. Cardiac plexus and the pulmonary plexus. Like I said, the dotted line is the postganglions. So look, takes. Okay. All of these plexes. We talked about all of this just now. Everything is mentioned here. Everything again is mentioned here. We've talked about this. All right, let's talk about parasympathetic nervous system. It's a craniosacral, like we said. Sacral. You know why? It has to be close to what it is. It affects or it activates. Cranial, because you have time, you are resting, you can do recreational activities like write music or a novel or some kind of like philosophical debate, whatever. You can do all of this. The preganglionic fibers, we said they are long. Preganglions are long. We talked about this. We agreed on this, right? They start from the cranial nerves, sometimes cranial nerve 3, 7, 9, and 10. Cranial nerve number 3 is the oculomotor nerve. It terminates at the ciliary ganglia. Number 7 is the facial nerve. Number 7 is actually is very popular. It's famous. I'm pretty sure each one of you has had an elderly tell them something like لا تستحمي وتقفي قدام المكيف وجهك حيتصلب أو حاجة زي كده صح؟ I don't know where they got that from, but it terminates in the pterygopalatine ganglion as well as the submandibular ganglion, so all in the face. Number 9 is the glossopharyngeal, and it terminates in the submandibular ganglion. These are ganglions, by the way. And then number 10 is vagus nerve, and it terminates at the otic ganglion. Okay, so these all are ganglions. Everything before is pre, everything after is post. Post ganglion, because these are ganglions. Okay, so we've talked about it. Everything in here we've mentioned. The parasympathetic regulates, like we said, glandular. Like I just said, if you see gland, you know it's going to take a while. So if it takes a while, it cannot be mass activating because it's taking a while. It also activates or regulates GIT function, defecation, urination, and sexual functions, which is why we call it that. Same thing here again. It's just that the vagus nerve regulates, only innervates the upper part of the GIT. The rest of it is innervated by pelvic spinal nerves S2 and 4, or S2 to 4. The autonomic plexus have both divisions, SNS and PNS, all 4 F's work together here. Why? Because in your celiac plexus, for example, it's the largest. So you can't have one division working on your stomach, spleen, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, and adrenal medulla. Just one. You can't have your system turned on perpetually. You will if only the sympathetic nervous system worked on this, you will have your all of this here basically turned off. Because your stomach will not be working, your spleen will have to take it has to take the back seat, pancreas, everything will be shut off. So until when? You can't have that. So your parasympathetic will have to come in and be like, okay, it's okay, we need to make immune cells for now, we need some immunity, so let's have the spleen work. We need to eat, let's have the stomach work. See, they have to work together and antagonize each other to keep you alive. Neurotransmitters are chemical substances. They are released by nerve ending. Okay, so they are substances that are released by a nerve ending, so they have to go somewhere, right? They go to receptors, different type of receptors. When two things bind, an effect has to happen. What kind of effect? Depending on the substance and the receptor, right? So there are 2 main substances here, acetylcholine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline. Like I said at the beginning, norepinephrine or adrenaline, it binds post-ganglion on the SNS only. So if you know this, you can easily know that everything else binds acetylcholine. What everything else? Everything else includes preganglionic fibers on both SNS, PNS, as well as postganglionic fibers of the PNS. Also, some of the postganglionic receptors of the SNS2. We will see in a minute. So everything except post-ganglion of the SNS is a receptor of acetylcholine. Okay? These others, these three are also neurotransmitters, but they're not as important as adrenaline and acetylcholine. Dopamine is very famous and very important. Like it does a whole bunch of things like schizophrenia and whatnot, and I won't go into it, but just, it's no harm to know these things. Okay, so acetylcholine and adrenaline are neurotransmitters. Transmitters transmitted by who? Released by who? By neurons. What kind of neurons? Two neurons. Cholinergic and adrenergic. Acetylcholine released by cholinergic. Remember when I said this? Epinephrine, which is adrenaline, is released by adrenergic. Okay. And we just said this. Cholinergic fibers release acetylcholine and then they go everywhere. Preganglion, postganglion, and some postganglion of the SNS2. What are they? The sweat glands and blood vessels of the skeletal muscles, specifically of the skeletal muscles, because your other blood vessels everywhere else, no, they are controlled by adrenaline. Okay? So, adrenergic fibers released norepinephrine, like we just said. It's also known as adrenaline or noradrenaline, to be more specific. It goes to all postganglionic sympathetic neurons except sweat glands and blood vessels of the skeletal muscles. Very important. It's secreted by adrenal glands. How? Didn't you just say they were released by adrenergic receptor neurons? Yes, I did. Language. Listen to my language. Adrenal glands secrete. Adrenal glands make norepinephrine. Adrenal glands make norepinephrine. And then it goes to the adrenergic fibers where it gets stored and released when needed. Again, adrenal glands make norepinephrine and secrete it. Secreted into the adrenergic fiber neuron where it gets stored and released when needed. When is it needed? When there's danger or perceived danger. Good so far? Yeah. So these are neurons, but the neurotransmitters need receptors. Neurons release the neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters have to go somewhere. Where do they go? They go to receptors. What kind of receptors? The acetylcholine goes to cholinergic receptors, and norepinephrine goes to adrenergic receptors. Okay, so they get released by cholinergic fibers and they go to a cholinergic receptor. What are they? Acetylcholine. There are two types of cholinergic receptors, nicotinic and muscarinic. Okay? Two types of cholinergic receptors. The nicotinic receptor is a ligand-gated. It is located on autonomic ganglia. It is blocked by hexamethonium. It is located on both autonomic ganglia as well as skeletal muscles. Look here. It goes to skeletal muscles and autonomic ganglia, but either way, it has the same effect. In both cases, it depolarizes the effector site and it opens the acetylcholine channel. So same effect. The muscarinic receptor, it is from M1 through M5. All of them are G proteins G proteins linked via intracellular second messenger. Okay, it is located on the parasympathetic effector tissue. Parasympathetic effector tissue. Why? Because it's acetylcholine. Remember, blocked by atropine. The number 2, M2, muscarinic receptor, is the only one that is kind of unique because everyone depolarizes except M2, it hyperpolarizes. Everyone depolarizes. Everyone. Nicotinic and muscarinic except M2, it hyperpolarizes. Hyperpolarizes which tissue to be specific? The heart. It goes to the heart, or it's in the heart, and it causes hyperpolarization. It's interesting. I mean, if I were you, or for me, I just memorize the thing that is different, and everyone else just follows the same pattern. Okay? The other type of receptor is the adrenergic receptor. Adrenergic. From adrenaline. Okay? There are 2 main types, alpha and beta, because things have to be complicated at some point. So alpha, there are 2 alphas and 3 betas. Okay? All of them are G protein like the muscarinic receptor, but they are different everywhere else. So, norepinephrine binds or acts on alpha. Why? Because norepinephrine is the most important and alpha comes first. So, first come, first serve. Norepinephrine is the most important here in this context. So, norepinephrine binds alpha. What does it do? It causes vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction. Norepinephrine goes to both alphas, but for alpha 1, it causes vasoconstriction. And on alpha 2, if it binds alpha 2, alpha 2 is a general inhibitor. So it's not very important. Beta receptors, on the other hand, they bind to, or they have epinephrine acting on them. Epinephrine. They act on the beta receptor. And what does it do? If it's beta 1, then they increase the heart rate and myocardial contractility. If it goes to beta 2, it acts on the smooth muscles as well as skeletal muscles. But the major thing here is that it causes bronchodilation and vasodilation. Bronchodilation and vasodilation. What are these? Don't these sound kind of familiar? Bronchodilation and vasodilation. This is why people who have allergy, especially type 1 hypersensitivity, they have EpiPens. Have you heard of those? EpiPens? EpiPens are epinephrine doses, basically. And they inject themselves with it to cause bronchodilation and vasodilation to counter effect the histamine. Histamine causes vasoconstriction and bronchoconstriction. Another topic for another day, but I just wanted to connect the dots. Anyway, so the most important thing here to know is that alpha 1 causes vasoconstriction and beta 2 causes vasodilation. So these two act opposite each other. Act in opposite direction against each other. They antagonize each other. This is a cause of norepinephrine, and this is caused by epinephrine. They are brothers made by the same gland, stored at the same site, but they act on different people and produce totally different effects. We've talked about this. We've also talked about this and this. Okay, regulation of ANS activity depends on one thing essentially, homeostasis. That's it. If one is acting, the other has to counter effect it to keep you in a homeostatic state. Okay, يعني if one has like excitatory has to have a counter effect from the inhibitory part. That's it, honestly. Like, you just need to know that they will act together against each other to maintain homeostasis. So mainly it is regulated by higher brain function from the hypothalamus, the limbic system, and the cerebral cortex. Your hypothalamus cares about your physiological state only. Limbic system is your emotion. Cerebral cortex is where your higher thoughts are, come from or processed. Like, religion, beliefs, philosophy, all of these higher thoughts are processed in your cerebral cortex. So, but the most important thing for the SNS is the hypothalamus. Not just for the SNS, for the ANS or movement is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus doesn't care about your emotions or your beliefs. The hypothalamus cares only about your physiological state. Are you okay physiologically? Are you alive? I don't care however you're feeling otherwise. That's what the hypothalamus does. Then there are reflexes like brainstem reflex, baroreceptor, which we talked about. This is the pressure thing. Chemoreceptor to keep your cardiovascular and respiratory regulated. And then there is the spinal cord reflex, micturition, defecation, and sexual reflexes. Interestingly, you're not born with these two. Children cannot do micturition, defecation. Micturition, by the way, micturition is just a fancy word of saying urination. So kids, they don't control when they poop or when they pee. They can't. They literally can't. It's controlled by their higher function at that point. Pico. They're controlled by their the higher function at that point. But then you toilet train them, and they learn how to control it. So it's an acquired reflex, so to speak. Okay, we've talked about this. The most important thing here is that it's subconscious. We've talked about this also at the beginning. Subconscious, it's totally out of your control and extremely independent. Lastly, there is the disorders of the autonomic control, the Horner's syndrome. Horner's syndrome is a profound disturbance in the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, so only your sympathetic responses will be affected here. It's caused by, it's an acquired thing, so it's usually caused by something. It's either a tumor, stroke, injury, or some underlying disease, but there must be something. What does that something do? It presses on the cervical sympathetic ganglia. It presses on the cervical sympathetic ganglia, causing a disturbance in the sympathetic responses. What kind of disturbances? The signs of the Horner syndrome are ipsilateral. Mostly ipsilateral means only one side. So meiosis, not to be confused with meiosis. Meiosis, that is cell division, it's different. Meiosis is pupillary constriction. Look, here the pupil is constricted where it's supposed to be dilated. Constricted where it's supposed to be dilated. Ptosis is the drooping of the eyelid. Look how the eyelid is drooped. I don't like the color. Look how the eyelid is drooped. Okay, here. Anhidrosis. Anhidrosis is reduced sweating, loss of sweating. Erythema, vasodilation. So you have red patches in the skin, or like skin reddening of the skin, because the blood vessels will be dilated. There is also something that is called enophthalmos. Enophthalmos is a sunken eyeball. The eyeball is sunken is also a sign of the Horner's syndrome. Lastly, the role of visceral pain, the role of ANS in visceral pain. ANS afferent C fibers carry pain information from the visceral organ to dorsal root. It's just, honestly, you just need to know from this is that visceral pain is caused by an association with autonomic nervous system. Why? Because the autonomic nervous system controls all the viscerals inside, everything. So that's why the visceral pain is caused by the autonomic nervous system, because it's the only thing that controls it. Okay, so usually it's nausea, sweating, and change in blood pressure, either drop or increase. The other important thing about it you have to know is that it is referred pain. It is referred pain felt in the somatic structure. Look, your stomach, you will feel your stomach. See, let's not talk about stomach, because stomach might be just obvious, but let's talk about the heart. Your heart is pretty much right here, but the pain can be felt all the way down to your forearm. Diaphragm is supposed to be here, but look where the pain is felt in the shoulder. The kidneys are like, I don't know, the back, but look where the pain is felt. So why these places, what's so special about them? They come from the same dermatome. They come from the same dermatome during development. For example, the diaphragm, since the diaphragm is here but it's felt there, these two places, they come from the same dermatome during development. And honestly, like, I feel this pain can be better understood in the pain lecture. And that's it. I hope that was at least